Good morning. I'm with you again on a Saturday, and we are continuing in our study, a series on the minor prophets from the Old Testament. Today we want to look at the book of Obadiah. Who was Obadiah? What was his ministry? First of all, you need to know that this is not the same Obadiah that lived during the days of Elijah. That man was hiding the prophets of the Lord from Jezebel, from killing them. I think it was 1 Kings 18. This guy lives further during the time, I think it's 2 Kings chapter, I got it here, chapter 8, and also 2 Chronicles chapter 21. So make a distinction between those two characters. Common name. The name means the worshiper of God or Jehovah, or the servant of Jehovah. Either way, a pretty good name, wouldn't you say? And he lived and prophesied while Judah, the southern kingdom, was in captivity and Jerusalem in ruins. This was when Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came against Judah, the southern kingdom, and captured them. So we have here, although he was an Israelite, he was not prophesying against Judah or Israel for that matter. His mission, his ministry was to prophesy against a country called Edom, which was east of the Dead Sea. They were the descendants of Esau, and now you may be familiar with that. Esau was the brother of Jacob. Genesis chapter, I think, 25. We see Esau as a man of carnality. He's a man of the flesh. In fact, Edom, the country, the descendants, are symbolized by the flesh. So we know the story. Jacob cheats him out of the blessing of his father Isaac with deception. Before that, he even takes his birthright through the selling of, I think it was a pot of stew, and Esau comes in famished from hunting, sees Jacob cooking, and Jacob says, "Give me your birthright, and I'll sell you this pot of stew." So Jacob is not a spiritual character at this point of the story. Later on, he becomes one after his transformation and is named Israel, the engaging of the angel of the Lord. But we're not going to get into all of that. I do want to say that Edom, the descendants of Esau, were at enmity with Israel for many years. You may recall in Moses' time when he was leading Israel through the wilderness, and then he wanted to pass through Edom and get to the promised land, and the Edomites prohibited that. God saw that. It was an unbrotherly deed, because remember, these two, Israel and Esau, were brothers. So, and even later on, that was in Numbers, by the way. Later on, also I should mention that God did not want Israel to despise an Edomite at that time. But later on, during the capture of Judah with the Babylonian siege there against it, some Edomites were taking the people of Judah and capturing them before they could flee from Nebuchadnezzar. So any way you cut it, Edom is not good, okay? And this was why, a lot of different reasons, God was telling Obadiah to prophesy against them. And so he does. So that's a little historical background between Edom and Israel. Also, you may want to know, if you don't, Edom produced the Herods, the puppet kings that were prevalent during the time of Christ and the early church. In fact, Herod the Great, nothing great about him, but he plotted to kill the Christ as a baby from Matthew chapter 2, failed, but they were a wicked people, the Herods. So this is who Edom was. Obadiah is sent to prophesy against them. Judgment, basically. And we have, he's speaking, declaring that all these things that God saw, they're about to get judged. It's the shortest book in the Bible, only 21 verses. And because Edom is so wicked toward Israel, it's a book where the theme is basically prophesying the doom against Edom and the judgment that was going to take place. All right, a few more things on Obadiah. They say that within 5 years, what did Edom get for turning in their brother, squealing on them, capturing them, handing them over to the Babylonians? They get crushed by Nebuchadnezzar within 5 years. So much so that their nation is reduced to practically ruins. By 150 BC, when the Romans are in power, it's called a lost nation. They can find really no descendants, the Edomites. They were scattered, many of them were killed. So they get what's coming to them, don't they? Their city, in which they thought was a fortress, was Petra, which in the Greek is called rock. It seemed to be impenetrable. I think I read where there was like a mile of a gorge that you had to go through to even get to the city of Petra. And yet it was not impenetrable. Nebuchadnezzar took it. So these are some of the things here that lead up to Edom being judged, Obadiah prophesying against them. He wrote pretty much during and after the time where Jerusalem fell, and judgment against Edom for assisting in and gloating over Judah's day of misfortune. There's really no place of origin or any autobiographical data about Obadiah. Some of the prophets are like that. Joel was another one that we saw. And the whole history here is the fraternal rivalry between Jacob and Esau. Let's just look at a few verses here. Verse 10, it says, "Because of violence to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame, and you'll be cut off forever. On the day you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gate and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were as one of them. Do not gloat over your brother's day, the day of his misfortune." Interestingly, Paul, the apostle, picks up a theme of this in the book of Romans, New Testament. He says, don't gloat when your enemy falls. Do not be glad. Do not rejoice. But do what? Feed him if he's hungry. Give him water to drink if he's thirsty. And this is in Romans chapter 12, 19 through 21. I'm not going to turn there. But the Christian dispensation is a whole different thing from the Old Testament in this regard, whereas Israel or Judah were pronouncing judgment against their enemies, in this case Obadiah. In the New Testament, we're to love our enemies. We're to do good to them. So just wanted to bring that out, just in case anybody says, well, let's tear down so-and-so. That's not the heart of the Lord in these days. The Edomites were also known as a people of wisdom. Interestingly, you might think, well, was that godly wisdom? Probably not. They were secular. They were carnal. Remember, we said they are associated with the flesh. Again, Paul, New Testament, says the spirit wars against the flesh against the spirit, so that you may not do the things that you please. I believe that's, was it Galatians chapter 5. So Edom represents the flesh. We deal with the flesh today as believers. The carnal nature, the Adamic nature that needs to be crucified, put to death, self-denial, all these kinds of things. Otherwise, the flesh can rise up and lead you astray. I know there's teachings that say the flesh is destroyed once for all when a believer or when a person becomes a believer. I haven't seen that to be the case. I think as you continue in sanctification, holiness, being led of the Lord, the fear of the Lord, knowing the word, all these things, the flesh diminishes in your life. Maybe even to the point where it's not even much of a factor, if at all. But I don't believe it just is eliminated altogether. Some of you may disagree with that. Live your life out, and you'll see if I'm mistaken about this. There are times when the flesh rises up. And we have a tendency sometimes to say, well, the devil, and that's true. I mean, we do come against principalities and powers. The devil prowls about like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. I know that, the spiritual warfare aspect of Christianity. However, I believe a lot of so-called attack is really our own flesh rising up to bring us into carnality, wrong choices, falling away eventually from God. So that's kind of like the application of Obadiah in our day and age. What else can I tell you about it? It's a short book, as I mentioned, so there's not a heck of a lot to bring out here. But they are a people that Israel has trouble with, mostly all through the Old Testament. The hostility lasted for centuries, and they had a false security that they lived in an impenetrable city. They caused trouble for Israel, and Obadiah is the one who's sent to them to prophesy against them. Another thing to bring out here, Obadiah laments the downfall of his enemies. That's what a true prophet will do. Unlike Jonah, I believe Jonah was a true prophet, but he didn't have the heart of God. There was no mercy, there was no compassion in him. He would have gladly gone to Nineveh, I believe it was, if he knew they were just all going to be wiped out, that there was no conditional thing in the prophecy. We'll look at him next week. So Edom is a thorn in the flesh for Israel, and Obadiah brings out the prophecies against Edom. That must have made Israel, Judah feel pretty good when someone like that, of that stature, is prophesying against their enemies. But they didn't repent. As we'll see in future studies of the minor prophets, they did not get right with God. Their enemies, Assyria to the north with Israel, Babylon to the south with Judah, come in and cause great havoc, destruction, captivity, exile. So these are the things of which Obadiah is dealing with. And one of the last things I want to say here is he is possibly linked with as a leader of the community of prophets. We know, and we said last week, the school of the prophets continued on, beginning with Samuel, through Elijah and Elisha, probably all the way to the days of the minor prophets. They were not as renowned as in the beginning, but the studies I looked at, some people said he was a leader of the community of prophets. So that's Obadiah, and he also, at the end there, let me read verse 18. He says, the house of Jacob will be a fire, the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau will be as stubble, and they'll set them on fire and consume them, so that there'll be no survivor of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. Then those of the Negev, Judah, the south, will possess the mountain of Esau. Those of the Shephelah, the Philistine plain, also possess the territory of Ephraim, the territory of Samaria, and Benjamin will possess Gilead. And the exiles of this host of the sons of Israel, who are among the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, and the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad, will possess the cities of the Negev, the south. The deliverers will ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. Remember what I said. Anytime where there's warning, judgment, doom and gloom, if you will, a minor prophet usually ends on hope, restoration, something positive. In this case, we see at the end of Obadiah some promises there. Do they always come to pass? A lot of them are conditional, depending on what the people group do in relation with the Lord. Prophecy is not always unconditional, where it's just going to happen regardless of what you do or don't do. A lot of times it's conditional. You have to posture yourself, put yourself in a position for these things to come to pass and be fulfilled. but that's a whole nother lesson. So that's basically what I want to share with you about Obadiah. You can read the letter. It's short. Verse 15 was another key scripture about dealings coming on their own heads. And we see this man, even though it's a short letter, it's pretty powerful. And there are applications of it today, as I mentioned, how to treat our enemies and these things, the flesh, warring against the flesh. So that's the word on Obadiah. Next week we'll cover Jonah. Again, if you like these teachings, trying to keep them short, you can like them on YouTube, share them with friends. Appreciate you viewers. I see, more and more people are tuning into this, which I'm grateful for. Shows me that the Lord is honoring his word. So have a blessed day. We'll see you next week with Jonah.